First on BBC One.
Hello and welcome to episode 46 of the History CV of Britain. I'm your host Paul, and this evening I'll be joined by Adam Tetlow, and we're going to be discussing this book, The Diagram, Harmonic Geometry, and other works by Adam. So that's something to look forward to. Now, I won't waffle for too long tonight because I've got two guests on. Melissa Campbell is joining us as well. But I just wanted to mention two quick videos. I'll be uploading the premiere of a video I recorded with a chap called Philip White on Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock. Philip's had a long interest in the historical King Arthur, and he believes that he's made a very, very significant discovery. He believes he's found the site of Avalon, and as I understand it, it's pretty close to Caer Caradog, in southeast Wales. So do look out for that. And on this Thursday, I'll be joining Richard Johnson on his Orgulug YouTube channel. And we'll be having a general chinwag about YouTubing, history, natural health, and maybe even a little bit of Jack the Ripper. You never know. So look out for that as well. Okay, right. I think I'll have a quick look in the chat to see who we've got in there this evening, and if you're all behaving yourselves. Forget please questions in capitals. Merlin's boy is with us this evening, and he's mostly gobsmacked. I wonder why he's gobsmacked. Maybe he'll fill us in later with that. Richard Johnson himself is here. Good to see you, Rich. Hello, Marshall. How are you? Hope you're very well. David J is with us. Good to see you, David. Ben Lee is here as well. And we've also got Elliot Flynn. Wow, Elliot, I think that's a new name. Good to see you, Elliot. Stephen Lashbrook is here. Andrew Christie is with us. Lord Tadley is in the house as well. That's good. Good to see you, John. Robert Paul Corliss is here. And Meg is also in the house. So we've got many people joining the chat. That's really good. Okay, right. I don't think I've forgotten anything. I do apologise this evening. My cats are really playing up this evening. They've been very noisy. So I'll mute myself if necessary. And hopefully they'll behave themselves as the show goes on. Right, okay. So I think I'll introduce Adam first. And I may have to play about with the screens this evening because it's there's three of us on the screen. So let's see if I can pull that one off as well. Okay, right. So today we're speaking with Adam Tetlow, an artist, writer, teacher, and one of the most original contemporary voices exploring the intersection between art, mathematics, harmonic geometry, and ancient thought. Adam studied under the renowned geometer Keith Critchlow at the Prince's School of Traditional Arts, an influence that shines through his unique ability to reveal the deep relationships between number, form, and meaning. Over the last 5 years, he has also worked closely with the late great John Neal, one of the leading researchers in ancient metrology, and this has further refined his understanding of ancient systems of measure and their harmonic foundations. He is the author of several influential works, including Celtic Pattern, ancient metrology, and the wooden book diagram, harmonic geometry, where he reintroduces the long-lost helicon, a master diagram used to unify geometry, ratio, harmony, music, perspective, and cosmology. He is also a contributor to the acclaimed wooden books volumes Quadrivium, Trivium, and Designer. Adam is a regular speaker at the Megalithomania conferences, where his insights into number, measure, symbolism, and ancient perception consistently captivate audiences. And if you haven't seen any of his presentations at Megalithomania, I highly encourage you to check them out. They're extremely thought-provoking. Through his work, Adam invites us to see the world as the ancients may have seen it, a world where number has quality, geometry is alive, and the simplest tools, like the ruler, hide profound forgotten knowledge. His research helps us glimpse the harmonic framework that may underlie sacred sites, traditional crafts, philosophical systems, and even the structure of the cosmos itself. So, without further ado, let's bring Adam on. Do bear with me. I've got lots of things open at the moment. So, hello, Adam. Can you hear me?
Hi, Paul.
Good to meet you. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for asking me on. That was a very nice introduction you gave me.
You're welcome, mate. You're welcome. Let's see if I can bring Melissa on as well. Okay. Right. And I'm just going to play about with the screens, everyone, very quickly, just to get Adam onto the main screen. So do bear with me a moment. We're just going to play about for a second because this is a live show. So 1, 2, 3. Brilliant. Look at that. That's magic. Great stuff.
Great.
Okay. So, Adam, I have so many questions for you. I found your work fairly recently. But I think the best thing to do is to start off by asking you how you first became interested in sacred geometry and ancient metrology. What was it that sparked your interest initially?
I think I've had an interest since I was a kid. I remember seeing George Bain's beautiful book on Celtic art in the bookshop when I was 9-10 years old. And, it was on the shelf with all the adult books. And I never realized at the time that I could have just asked my mum and she would have probably bought it for me. But I waited until I was a couple of years later when I was like, no, I definitely need this book, and got the book and worked with it a little bit, certainly played with it, but it didn't have a massive impact. And then at school, we did this project on platonic solids where we had to make them out of cardboard and glue them all together. And I literally gave up all my other schoolwork and I said, all I'm doing is making platonic solids now for the rest of the term. And if you don't let me do it, I'm not going to come in. So, so from that point, I sort of was into geometry. And then, I guess teenage years, you're pulled in all directions. You don't have much time to focus. And then I studied art at university, which, didn't really offer many resources. And so it was all about self-learning. And immediately I, hit the library and found all this tradition, this sort of ancient thread of people that are interested in geometry. And that really got me the bug. And I, played about and tried different things, read different authors. And then after finishing my degree and working in schools for a few years, I just found this advert for a postgraduate program taught by Keith Critchlow, and thought straight away, this is what I need to sort of anchor my knowledge and help me progress in this subject. And I didn't look back. Keith was an amazing teacher.
Brilliant. Okay. And you also worked under John Neal, or you trained with John Neal for 5 years or so, didn't you? So that must have been quite some experience.
Yeah, maybe even longer than 5. It was great. John was always a laugh, was always up for a good conversation. Most of, he taught me his whole system of ancient metrology with no qualms at all, didn't ask me for anything in return. He was just happy to pass it on to someone else that could then go on maybe to pass it on to other people. And so we'd meet in the pub and we'd chat, and a few hours later we'd both stumble out having discussed the cosmos and had a good laugh.
Oh, it must have been an amazing experience. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I caught your Megalithomania lecture. I think it was from 2019. And in that talk, you opened with Hermes and Thoth as figures of culture, communication, and also trickster-like intelligence. So what role do you feel these mythic figures play in our understanding of measurement and knowledge?
That's a deep question, Paul, because, let's talk about Thoth first. So Thoth, or Tehuti, or Jehuti, as he would have been called, came into European mythology as Hermes, as Mercury. He's, of course, every mythology tends to have figures that represent the planets. But Thoth specifically, and his consort Seshat, they were specifically not always focused entirely on measure, but measure was definitely a specific part of the things that they governed. And so, Thoth essentially being a mythologization of the mind, of our ability to make, to craft, to trade, to sing, to write poems. He was, or he still is, the patron of communicators, of artists, of poets, speakers, but also of con men and thieves. So it's like, which level do you hit this mythology on? It's like you could hit it as a communicator that inspired people and brought something good to their life, or you could hit it as a con man that stole from people. And this is both the qualities of Hermes, and that's why maybe that trickster thing comes in with Hermes, because if you don't get on the right side of him, then you're left in quite an unfortunate position. But when it comes to mythology in a wider way, and this is maybe clearest in Schwaller de Lubic's analysis of Egyptian art and Egyptian architecture, it's as if those early thinkers were creating a mythological figure based on the mathematical ideas that were underlying them. So my contention is that the entire tradition, the entire scientific tradition, the entire theological tradition, emerges from the entire philosophical tradition, emerges from very early humans' work with number.
Okay, brilliant. Any thoughts, Melissa?
As I totally agree with you, but I wanted to ask you then how you felt that Plato's Timaeus and his other works worked within that tradition, and how old do you think it goes back? How far do you think it goes back?
Well, in terms of Plato, he's absolutely part of the tradition. It's he's using those same numbers, the numbers that describe the dimensions of the earth, the numbers that describe simple whole number harmonies. For instance, in Republic, he's got all these sets of figures that are, a different number of these people and these people and these people. And when you look at those numbers, you can actually see musical relations between them. So it was a way for him to talk about these things without breaking his oath, because of course for the Greeks they'd made this oath to not give anything away. And so Plato, if he'd have given the goods away that he got under initiation, it would have been off with his head. But in terms of the tradition itself, ancient metrology, the earliest examples we've clearly got are at Carnac in Brittany, Mace Howe up in Scotland, Noath and Newgrange in Ireland. These are super early sites that have these measures in them. Göbekli Tepe, clearly it's a built structure. Someone's needed some sort of measure to build that. But the archaeologists, as far as I know, haven't given away much detail yet. And so we can't really see whether Göbekli is fully part of that system. But, I know John thought that anything we find from any date will probably have that, unless it's, completely indigenous stuff, maybe like cave paintings or, petroglyphs and things.
I was going to say that Howard Crowhurst has done a video on Göbekli Tepe and found all his usual bits and pieces that he finds. This
Okay.
double, the triple square, the double square, etc., etc.
Yeah. Howard's amazing, and has led the field with his landscape geometry stuff for a while. I didn't realize he'd done a video on Göbekli. I'll go and watch it after we talk. If he's found the measures there, then fantastic. Although I know Howard has a soft spot for the meter, which John and myself are not so into.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Brilliant. Okay. Talking of measures, Adam. So you make the striking claim that the ruler is perhaps humanity's oldest scientific instrument hiding in plain sight. So what makes the ruler so profound, and what did the ancient people embed within it?
Well, I suppose what makes the ruler profound is that, it's hiding a system of knowledge that has been worked out, thousands, perhaps even tens of thousands of years. And because of that, it's just this complete, that's what I find amazing. It's this totally innocuous object. Nobody gives a second thought, and sits on everybody's desk. And yet here is the proof of a survey of the earth. Because what's amazing with the English foot, with all of the traditional feet from every period of history and every culture that's used them, all of these traditional feet have simple whole number relationships between them. And they're all calibrated to the dimensions of the earth. And, you could read John Neal's work for further detail on that. It's one of those subjects that if I try and explain it here, everyone, your audience and you and probably me, will just go completely bonkers, because you need a piece of paper and you need examples and you need to, take it slow. John always used to say it's not complicated, but it is complex.
Definitely. Okay. Well, when you talk about precision as taking care, how do you see intentional precision expressing itself in ancient monuments?
Well, I suppose we can see, for instance, with the Great Pyramid, from corner to corner, there's, less than an inch between the heights. And this is acres across. That diagonal's close to 900 feet. That level of precision, if we think about, us, we're trying to draw something to scale, say, and we're saying, I'm happy with 99% precision. Maybe I'll be slightly off on the corners, but that'll be all right because it's for this audience and they don't care about that precision. Now, imagine you've got to draw it to scale for a carpenter. You've got to get it to 99.9% precision because they've got to cut that absolutely bang on. But if you've got to give it to an engineer, they've got to get it to 99.99% precision. And the difference between those is an order of magnitude. We could say, for argument's sake, it's about 10 times. It's not quite 10, but it's effectively 10 times the amount of effort to go from 99 to 99.9. And you look at the pyramid, and that that corner to corner distance is maybe 99.9999. And even modern engineering tolerances are rarely used to that level unless it's engines and spacecraft and that sort of thing. Ships.
And why do you think, in your opinion, they were so precise? What was that about?
I suppose we can see any ancient culture working with the tradition, but let's stick with the Egyptians. I suppose we can see that mathematics was not only a rational science for assessing things and calculating as our mathematics is, but it was also a symbolic science that was heavily married or completely married with ritual. And so for those surveyors that are laying out a site to great precision, that effectively makes their ritual and their space more effective. Schroller de Lubeck's puts it in a very nice way. He talks about this idea of the gesture. We know gestures. Someone waves, we understand that immediately. And there's lots of other gestures, most of which hand gestures are quite rude, so I won't do. But there's things like this. We know that means good. We know that when we see someone's body language in a certain way, we get a certain impression. And that gesture, you know, our movement is holding an idea, it's holding a principle within it. And it's the same thing with the rituals and the practices of ancient people, is that they're wanting to hold the, you know, perhaps they're evoking or invoking a god or a spirit. Perhaps they're wanting to placate something, or they're wanting to, you know, in some way, you know, change the order of what's going on. And so in order for them to do that, they had to make a ritual that held that energy perfectly. You know, you could make it even simpler. You could say, think of a cup. A cup has to have certain qualities in order to still be a cup. You know, if it had a hole in, it wouldn't be a cup. If it was made out of tissue, it wouldn't be a cup. It wouldn't hold water. So as soon as you start to have a gesture, you know, that cup's our gesture. As soon as you have a gesture that no longer is able to hold the energy or the idea, then it no longer functions. And so that accuracy made that gesture all the more perfect. And on top of that, you know, they're also leaving evidence for future humans. You know, they were a culture that was, you know, entirely obsessed with reincarnation, or metempsychosis, as Plato would call it. And so they knew they had to preserve this stuff, because they knew they were coming back. And, you know, if it wasn't preserved, they wouldn't be able to have access to it.
Do you think that was also a result of thousands of years ago, some sort of cataclysmic event happened, and so therefore they wanted, that's another reason why they wanted to preserve this information?
It could be, you know, but it could be that the measure system or the survey predates that cataclysm. And that, you know, cultures like the Sumerians and the Egyptians and the Chinese and the South Americans, the Neolithic Europeans, somehow inherited that. It was, you know, preserved along with some other ideas. And, you know, you look at structures maybe like the Sphinx, or like, you know, all this new stuff in Indonesia. And that could, you know, that could easily predate our earliest culture. And so we, you know, the cataclysm idea is something that comes around again and again throughout the tradition. Plato talks about it, that, you know, the earth is alternately scoured by water and then fire every, you know, 26,000 years or part thereof.
And in fact, when Plato talks about the ideal numbers of citizens in his city, it's kind of similar, isn't it? It's like you can't have any more or less than 5,040, and if there are any more, then they have to go off and find their own city. So it's kind of a similar idea that you have to be so precise with these numbers.
Exactly. And when he's talking about those citizens, he's also talking about ratio and proportion. You know, 5040 fits in with the moon and the earth and the pyramid dimensions. You know, it's also 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5 times 6 times 7. And so, you know, John Michel has written extensively on these numbers, and I'm sure you're well aware. But it's just so amazing that when you look and when you start to, you know, search through the various traditions, whether that's architecture, whether that's scripture, whether that's painting or sculpture, you start to see the same numbers appear over and over again. And you see that, you know, this set of ideas of somehow applying these numbers to the arts and to the built world was a universal truth for almost every culture that we can imagine.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Adam. Yeah, in the lecture that I watched recently, you trace harmonic intervals from the monochord to architectural design. Why is harmony rather than abstract mathematics the key to ancient measure, do you think?
Well, I think it's not just the key to ancient measure. I think it's the key to ancient thought. I think that early cultures wanted to embed the idea of harmony at every level of reality. whether that's the justice system, whether that's the music system, whether that's the days of the week, whether that's how we work with metals, whether that's our calendar, whether that's our measure system and our geometry. And so they're really wanting to echo this idea of harmony. And let's look at what harmony is. Harmony is just the relationship of whole numbers to each other. And, a beautiful harmony should create a perfect balance, not an equal balance of two sides the same, but a balance as in a right proportion. And, you look at the musical scale, the very simple Pythagorean musical scale, you've just got an octave either side, and you've effectively, or I'll mention only two notes, you've got a musical fifth and a musical fourth. Mm-hmm. Now, the musical fifth is the mean between those two octaves, the arithmetic mean, and the musical fourth is the harmonic mean between. So it's really about proportion, and ratio and harmony are essentially the same thing. Proportion is just an extension of ratio, and ratio and harmony is essentially identical. And these ideas, they have been embedded, across the board in every culture we can imagine. Because, there's this lovely idea, this photograph, this painting of Orpheus charming the birds and the animals, but also the trees. And this idea that comes from Plato, that comes, in all the late Platonists, that, through music, we can alter our internal worlds. We can alter our state of mind, our state of emotions, and we can redirect our mind and our consciousness back towards the one as in the source of all. Because, of course, all of these cultures are theistic cultures. They all have, a whole pantheon and a source behind that, or they're monotheists. These ideas are, predate atheist ideas.
Okay.
And you mentioned about ratio and proportion in relation to whole numbers, integers. What do you think is the place of irrational numbers, truly irrational numbers in the ancient world? Do you think they have a place, or do you think they were known, or do you think they were symbolic of something maybe that wasn't really easily expressed or magical?
I think they were known. I think they would have been understood because they were such good geometers, and those rational numbers, those irrational numbers, always play a part in drawn geometry. Your diagonal is always going to be irrational to your square edge, for instance, or your circle's diameter is irrational to your circumference. But it's not that they didn't use them or they rejected them. It's that they held that as a deep secret. And so the authors we're reading were not really able to talk about it. And that in practice, the craftspeople were given simple rational alternatives. So instead of the square root of 2, you've got 99/70. Or instead of the golden section, you've got 8/5 or 13/8. And so it's,
John Neal wrote, sorry.
Well, it's just so interesting that these two, we think about rational and irrational, rational and irrational. And in the history of mathematics, there's this argument about when the Greeks finally figured out the irrational and, how that changed mathematics. I really don't think that is the case at all. I just don't think that argument's even there. And, John's got a very nice essay on academia about Hippasus and how, because he was the one who's supposed to have given the game away about the irrationals, and how he was killed, not because he gave the game away, because he proved himself to be an imposter, because he didn't really understand what he was giving away. But back to rational and irrational, rational and irrational, they alternate between them. So this alternation principle is there throughout geometry. So let's say we've just got a square, and there's another square inside it, and another square inside that, and they just go zoom all the way down. Now, every pair, to do that, you'd have to turn your inner square on its point, and then you put another square flat, and then on the point. And so as you do that, you're making up this whole sequence of rational and irrational, rational and irrational pairs. And so you find that throughout geometry that, so if I make my circle a whole number, my diameter is going to be irrational. If I make my square diagonal a whole number, my edge will be irrational. But if I flip it the other way around, my edge rational, my diagonal will be whole. So it's like this alternating principle that you can't really have one without the other. And when you draw it geometrically, you'll see that, the whole number relationships give way to irrational relationships and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, brilliant. So just going back to sound, lights, geometry and number, do you think modern science is rediscovering this unity, or are we moving further away from it?
I think we're coming round to the idea that everything is connected. We've got ideas like unified fields, unified quantum fields, all this sort of stuff. I think it's always been there behind the sciences. I think the top practitioners, the ones that make all the breakthroughs, I think they fully understand that, this is what the ancients understood. Someone like Tesla or Einstein or Newton, certainly all of them were deeply into this material, and really they incorporate, they've sort of brought that into the sciences for us. And I think, in that respect, sciences are coming towards this idea of universal harmony, perhaps. And perhaps one day sound will be, a major technology, across the sciences. Mm. But at the same time, I do think that our direction of how we're applying the sciences is getting further and further away from this ancient way of thinking. Mm. And, it's become more about what we can do and less about what we should do or what actually benefits us.
Mm. Yes, I would definitely agree with that. Okay. Okay, so in your wooden book diagram, which is here, you reveal the harmonic division diagram or star cut. I think Plato referred to it as the perfect cut. Can you explain its essence and why it's so central to the ancient arts and crafts?
Yeah, I think Plato was talking about the perfect cut as the golden section.
Yeah, sorry.
So, but it's a minor point. Why is it important? It's important because it holds all of the simple whole number divisions within it. So you want to divide the edge of your square into half, or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 27. That can be achieved. Any fraction division can be achieved just through simple geometry with this diagram. On top of that, it's just the way that it's sort of so ubiquitous throughout all of the traditions. We see it. It's there in Pompeii. It's there in the Templars have got it. It's there with the medieval China. It's there with the Gothic cathedrals. It's there on Peruvian and Egyptian and Neolithic artifacts. So it's just something that pops up over and over again because it's just so useful for craftspeople to work with any ratio. Often when we're looking at these measures, you look at them and you think, oh, that's a complicated length. How can anyone achieve, just making the ruler to make that measure? But with geometry and with this star cut or harmonic division device, it's essentially allows you to, use geometry as an abacus. So you can create a length that's any number required, as long as that's a whole number fraction.
Hmm. So you've shown that the diagram works in any rectangle. So does this universality tell us something deeper about how the ancient worldview understood space, do you think?
Space is a massive concept, isn't it? I think they did understand space in a different way. And even, let's come back to space. But I think in terms of ancient geometers wanting to survey the land to great accuracy over long distances, this is an amazing tool. And, you know, it gives them all sorts of mathematical powers without having to do calculation, with just string and, you know, long pins that go into the earth. You can lay out any length or distance. There's tons of other practical uses. You know, even today it's being used by scientists in the Hadron Collider, because it turns out that as those particles collide, their energy states decay according to harmonic principles. And so you can actually see a similar sort of diagram in some of their papers, where they're showing, you know, the change in energy state according to this harmonic division.
Amazing. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to pi phi prime limits and the microfractions. So you describe pi and phi as locked in a dance. So how did the ancient builders work with irrational numbers in a rational harmonic way?
Well, what's nice with phi, with the golden section, or specifically the Fibonacci sequence of the golden section, is it's just based on whole numbers. You know, 1 + 1 is 2, 2 + 1 is 3, 3 + 2 is 5, and you just go on and on and on, and that gives you the golden section. And so, you know, just by using those whole numbers, that, you know, that's very simple for any craftsperson to work with. When it comes to pi, they're able to derive pi, or at least the ancient versions of pi, particularly 22/7. There's others that I won't mention because I don't want to complicate it. But particularly 22/7, that exists exactly as, if that is 6, then 5 will be 55/21, which is, you know, again, from that Fibonacci sequence of just adding 1 to 1 and 2 to 1 and so on and so on. But instead of it being the golden section, it's the square of the golden section. So you're skipping one of those terms. So basically, those guys were able to find this relationship between the square of the golden section and between pi, and you know, make the most of it, because it fitted their harmonic conception to have a whole number version of pi. And, you know, we say, you know, we're very obsessed with the irrationals now as a culture, or the mathematical part of our culture at least. And, you know, we learn in school this number goes on forever and ever and ever and ever. And, you know, mathematically that is of course correct. But any time that someone wants to make something and use one of those irrationals, they're cutting it short, because they, you know, the human hand, even a super accurate laser engraver, can only do it so accurately. Once you get past 4, 5, 6 decimal places, it's impossible. And so everyone that's actually practically using those irrational numbers to build or make with, they're always changing them into fractions, whether they intend to or not. And, you know, mathematics plays this nice game where, you know, we have pi, for instance, on both sides of the equation. So we don't actually have to, you know, get it out and use it. We're just transferring it from one side to the other when we're doing calculations with it. And so it all works out lovely. And we're left with the, you know, this is a perfect irrational, and our, you know, our search for perfection and order is, you know, sort of gratified by that. But we never mention that, you know, nothing that's built ever uses those irrational pi's, because it's impossible, because we can't get, you know, an infinite number of decimal places on a cut piece of wood, or a washer that's cut by a laser engraver or a computer. So we're always here in the rational world, and so irrationals for us have to be rationalized for us to use them. And so the ancient people, they thought, well, let's have a rational value that, you know, is going to be easy to use and easy to remember, and as, you know, as well is fully a composite part of this system of engineering we call ancient metrology.
But isn't it so interesting to think that everything in this world is necessarily an approximation of, like, applied geometry? That you're never going to get an actual circle that that reflects like the real transcendental pi, but that you're always just so close, and that world is just kind of just beyond our reach, and maybe that was of interest to this ancient system, that you're always in this world, but you're always in the divine world as well. And
yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right, and I think that they absolutely had respect for these. You know, again, back to Schwaller de Lubic's. He's, you know, other than Keith and John, Schwaller is my main teacher, even though he died long before I was born. But you know, Schwaller talks about the temple at Luxor, how the Holy of Holies, the central part of that temple, the pillars are spaced out using irrational numbers, using the square root of 5, the square root of 2, the square root of 3. And he also superimposes a body onto this temple, and where those irrational lines are, that would be the glands within, you know, which you know, someone like Steiner perhaps has called this, you know, part of our consciousness coming into the world through the, you know, the glands, you know, the pituitary gland and the pineal gland and so on and so on.
Yeah. Can I just say, it's just quite unusual for a student of Schwaller de Lubic's not to believe in a meter in the ancient world.
Well, you know, Schwaller made mistakes. He didn't have the data. The data wasn't around really until relatively recently. I suppose, you know, the 60s, the 70s, we started to get more and more accurate data on the Earth, and then John Neal and John Michel solved this problem of ancient metrology, and you know, they realized that the meter that we have is actually in error. You know, the meter that we have was installed by the French bureaucracy after the French Revolution, because their original foot was called the Pied du Roi, the foot of the king, and they wanted to get rid of that, and so they found these surveyors to you know, to do a survey, and they were originally aiming for 10 million meters from the pole to the equator on the surface of the Earth. And so they found this measure, and the French bureaucracy spent loads and loads of time installing it. You know, there were riots in the street, there was all sorts of trouble. And then 60 years later, another survey was done correcting that. And the scientists went to the bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy said, no way. We had so much trouble installing it last time, it'll have to be fixed here. And so this original conception of the meter as an Earth measure is a complete failure. You know, the ancient measure system is able to measure the Earth precisely, whereas the meter needs a fragmented number in order to measure the Earth.
Can we not give the ancients the benefit of 7 kilometers overall on the polar circumference? And what about the royal cubit, the Egyptian royal cubit as 5 squared times 20 in meters?
Well, again, that's not accurate. It's fine if you reduce it down to decimal places. You know, 2-3 decimal places looks fine, looks 100%. But once you actually do it precisely with the irrational calculations, it's way out. And whereas if you use the metrological pies and the metrological meter, the true meter that's actually is 10 million from equator to pole, then that equation with, you know, the meter and phi works perfectly. Whereas,
yeah, it works with 39.375 inches, doesn't it? That's John Neal's 20.1818 inches for the cubit. But
let me just get my calculator to say, what did you say? 38. I'm so used to working with me.
39.375 inches for the meter.
Yeah. What did John give for the meter? 3. I don't usually do it in meters, in feet, or in inches. Sorry, I usually use the feet figure, which is 3.28084275 feet per meter, per, you know, a modern meter.
Yeah,
now we truncate that slightly, and it was truncated by US weights and measures in the early 20th century. So we've, you know, actually the American foot was slightly altered to fit the modern meter. But I just, let's talk about, let's carry on. I won't rant.
Okay, let's just go back briefly to John Michel and John Neal, Adam. So you highlight their work, and there were key figures in reconstructing metrology. So what, in your view, is the single greatest insight from their work?
Well, from John Michel's initial insight was finding these tiny fractions, this difference between the polar radius and the average radius of 440 to 441. And that was John's discovery, and another fraction as well, which he was able to then unite with the previous discovery of his, the New Jerusalem diagram. And then what John Neal did, he realized that what John Michel had done was correct, but he'd left it relatively, he'd left it as a relatively small scope of cultures that he'd discovered, the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Persians, the Hebrews, the Europeans. He didn't expand it any further. So what John did was, trawl through every piece of data he could get in order to make this final realization that all of the feet all over the world from every time and place are interconnected with simple whole numbers, and they are also calibrated to the dimensions of the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant. Okay. So you argue that ancient measures around the world from a musical tuning system. So what does this mean for how we understand cultural connections in antiquity, would you say?
Again, back to this idea of harmony and harmonics. If you think about a tuning system has to be, numbers have to be compatible. So I'm not necessarily talking about our contemporary musical scale, which is just got a slight tweak difference from the ancient ones. The ancient ones used whole numbers. So to make those notes in that whole number system compatible, you've got to have relatively simple numbers. If, for instance, the Pythagorean tuning system just uses the numbers 2 and 3. It expanded by Ptolemy using the numbers 2, 3, and 5. So all the intervals, all the spaces between the notes, and all the lengths themselves that make those notes are simple whole numbers just made out of those 3 numbers. Whereas metrology needs to expand that slightly. And again, it's because of pi, it's because of the golden section. It needs to be able to use pi. Any engineer that can't use pi can't make anything circular. Mm-hmm. And so it had to use pi. And so it needed the number 7 and the number 11 so that it could use pi as 22/7. And so that music system was expanded just outside of the musical scale in order to allow pi to be integrated with a harmonic system. And I think that, that we're seeing this all over the world, and that we see that same simple Pythagorean scale all over the world. In fact, it's probably physiological, because we find that humans that sing or play an unfretted instrument next to each other without a plan tend to deviate by a musical fifth or a musical fourth. So it seems to be that those notes themselves are physiological, and it appears that we've got a dedicated nerve for the octave, the fifth and the fourth, whereas all of our other cochlear apparatus are like tiny little hairs that resound from different sounds. But those notes have their own dedicated pathway. And so, I think it's so important to remember that, harmony is their goal, both harmony within society and making the earth an image of cosmic harmony or divine harmony. I don't know if that answers your question.
Like what you were saying earlier about Plato and the precision of the pyramids, and it all ties in, doesn't it? And with music and proportion and ratio, it's an amazing system, and it's the quadrivium as well, isn't it? That's it the same system is in all these different spheres. So you've written about the quadrivium, I think.
Yeah.
Well, it's fascinating, isn't it? We call it the quadrivium, these 4 arts of number, arithmetic, geometry, harmony, and astronomy. But really, for the cosmos, there's no distinction between those. We see a musical note, which we can also measure as an actual length. But for the cosmos, there's no distinction. A musical note, a number, a length, a geometrical figure, that's all the same. It's only humans that, we need to make little separate boxes because our minds are not as big as the cosmos. So, but for the universe, there's no distinction between a number and a sound and a geometric figure.
Yeah, and I guess everything is vibration, and that's an ancient thought as well, isn't it?
Yeah. This idea of the law of vibration just goes throughout so many writers, cultures, whether that's Plato, whether that's ancient Egypt, whether that's Gurdjieff, even the trading guys are still using all of that sort of stuff through their teacher Gann, W.D. Gann, who talks about all these ideas in terms of financial markets. So it's ubiquitous everywhere.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to take a question from the audience. I don't want to forget. So this is from Andrew Christie for you, Adam. Does a foot relate to the distance travelled by the Earth's rotation of 1 second of arc?
Yes, but it's not the foot that we think. It's not our number one, our English foot. It's a slightly extended English foot, which is very commonly found, plenty of evidence and data for, and that would be 1.01376 feet. And if we were to times that by 100, we'd have exactly 1 second of arc. So that foot would be 100th of that second of arc.
Okay, thank you. And just one from Stephen Lashbrook as well. Hi, Adam. Are there any indications from the ancients on how they described light and where it propagates from? Did they believe it had speed and the law of conservation, light leaving glass, water?
I know there's a lot of stuff that's been proposed with the pyramid about, it's showing the constant of the speed of light and all of that sort of thing. I've never found that conclusively proved. I'm open to it being proved, but I think I'd still want some more evidence. But in terms of the ancient people's idea of light, my favorite is the Hermetic idea. In Hermeticism, Nous, the mind of the cosmos, is literally intelligent living light. And so the whole of the cosmos is an intelligence made of light. And that is that's the Hermetic point of view, and Hermeticism came out of late Egyptian Alexandria, and is highly likely to be very influenced by ancient Egypt. So light was the center of the show, just like it still is, but in an intelligent, conscious, divine way, rather than a mechanistic set of constant standards.
Okay, brilliant, thanks. So you've shown how parallel harmonic frameworks in the Great Pyramid, Stonehenge, Chinese altars and Mayan calendars. How do you interpret the worldwide presence of a shared metrological logic?
There can only be two answers, and I've had this argument so many times with different friends. Some could see it as, yes, it's just the surveyors. They did what we would do. They'd go out and they surveyed the earth and they measured it and they disseminated it around the earth at a time when there was a sort of global culture. It wouldn't have had to have been a fully global culture as we imagine it, but there's always been itinerant mercenaries and teachers and priests and so on moving across borders. So it seems as though that class or those classes did disseminate these ideas. So you've got I've sort of lost my thread now. Ask me the beginning bit of that question again.
I was just how do you interpret the worldwide presence of a shared metrological logic? So you showed harmonic frameworks in the Great Pyramid, Stonehenge, Chinese altars.
Yeah, that's it. So I said there was two possible versions. So one possible version is it's discovered, it's disseminated through a global or semi-global culture at an early point in history. And the other option is humans were so psychically tuned that they were able to directly interface with the earth itself and ask those questions of the earth itself. And so I've got a bunch of friends who sit in these two camps. They won't agree with each other at all on those two ideas. But for me, I think, maybe it's back to this idea when we said, why are they doing it ritually? Why are they doing it in connection with mythology? And I think probably what they were doing is, they were highly psychically attuned. They were, able to talk to, what we would call, maybe the spirit of the planet or something like that. Perhaps they were. But at the same time, they ritually had to make those measures perfectly on the ground in order to map their image of the cosmos perfectly, so it would reflect this psychic image that they've perhaps picked up. And so for me, it's a scientific practice, but it's a scientific practice done for a spiritual reason.
I would agree with that, and it's cultural.
Right.
It's a culture that's shared.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at Stonehenge, you've demonstrated how Roman, Greek, and English feats emerge from simple geometric operations. So do you think the builders understood this consciously, or is it a natural result of harmonic thinking?
Again, it's back to what we were just talking about. I think it was consciously.
Okay.
I think that they consciously wanted to build a specific thing of a specific size. I think it's the same going on in Egypt. It's the same going on all over the world. But I do think that there were, deep metaphysical reasons that they wanted to do that. So, it's almost the same thing. They had an intention, they had a specific plan, they laid it out specifically as any geometer would, with tight string that didn't stretch, long pins that went in the ground. For instance, John was telling me just before he died that the post holes at Stonehenge, those really oldest parts at Stonehenge, when they were excavated, there was absolutely no debris, no stones, no flints, no any rubbish in those holes. It was just all pure compacted earth. And he said what they would have done is dug out the earth, sifted it fine and packed it back in. And then when they got their long pins, they'd be able to shove it in the earth and it wouldn't get any deflection off a stone or a flint. And so that would be able to keep their center very, very precisely. And with, string made out of deer gut, they'd be able to measure to, 3 decimal places. So they could achieve these things. But I think it's maybe a mistake to say they were entirely rational and building them for entirely rational purposes, or entirely metaphysical and building them for entirely metaphysical purposes. It's that those two things were the same for them. And so, our mind, our modern conception sees, well, these are the arts and these are the sciences, or this is theology and this is science. And we see them as separate things. And for the people that built these buildings, they were not. So that, they were scientific laboratories, essentially, the Stonehenge, the pyramids, whether that's astronomical, whether it's metrological, perhaps, as some people are suggesting in Egypt, perhaps even chemical. But those precise scientific instruments were also precise ritual instruments for their spiritual practice. So there's no distinction between them for those people.
Yeah. Can I just ask, what do you think happened? Why do we distinguish between them so much? And when did this happen? This kind of disjointedness between the two things?
It's funny, isn't it? It's funny. Where can we pin it down? This Rudolf Steiner talks about how at certain points in the past we've lost access to modes of perception. He talks about in the early Middle Ages, we lost access to the spirits of the planets. We were no longer able to communicate them. And in the late Renaissance, we lost access to the earth spirits and the nature spirits, and we were no longer able to communicate with them. And so is it that over time our consciousness has shifted? Does consciousness change perhaps on this long precessional cycle as well? And so as consciousness changed, what we intuitively knew was correct started to disappear. And then we started to prove and need proof and need further proof. And, as things go on, some of those early symbolic ideas then become interpreted rationally and are held up as ridiculous because they don't fit a rational framework. And this builds on this, and this builds on this, and then we end up in the Enlightenment, and it's full on duality from there.
Maybe the Enlightenment wasn't completely full of light.
No, well, we call it the Enlightenment, but there were some really bizarre mechanistic models of the world going round. That I don't know if you've ever looked into the papers of the Royal Society and how the Royal Society would have their lectures in the early days. Some of it was horrific. They'd get a dog and take one of its lungs out and use a pump to bellows so that this is just mechanical and all that sort of thing. Descartes used to kick his dog to prove that it was a machine. So there's obviously some sort of
unconvinced.
There's some sort of mental disjoint there. I imagine they feel full of sort of personal power and strength because of their discoveries and their great mind, and that goes to their head, and they start thinking that they can behave like God, maybe.
Okay, excuse my cat for the minute. The New Jerusalem diagram, Adam, appears repeatedly in your work. What does the diagram represent to you as a symbol and as a practical template?
Well, as the practical template, we can draw the Earth, the Moon, and the Great Pyramid all as one integrated system to scale. Certainly, the Earth and Moon are to scale, or maybe not to scale, to ratio. With this 3:11 proportion, the Earth is 3 in diameter. The Moon's 3 in diameter. The Earth's 11 in diameter, and so there's that aspect. But really, for me, it's the canonical diagram of the entire system, because once you apply things like Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man and the harmonic division of the star cut onto this drawing, and they superimpose perfectly, you start to see that the ancient system of measure, or the ancient system of arranging the quadrivium in a certain way, are rooted in the New Jerusalem diagram.
Okay, fantastic, thank you. Okay, so you closed your talk at Megalithomania by suggesting the universe itself may be a standing wave. Is the harmonic worldview ultimately a metaphysics, a science, or both, would you say?
Well, I'd have to say both. I'd have to say that the destiny of science and metaphysics is to meet once more. And there's plenty of thinkers that are doing that. And I do think that trying to unpack how ancient people thought about science and metaphysics is going to help us to find that solution in the modern day. So I do think they're both. Okay.
Well, what does this harmonic perspective tell us about human consciousness?
That everything we are has grown and developed on a substrate of harmony, and that the ultimate harmony is, as Archytas, Plato's friend, said, Archytas of Tarentum, is the harmony of 1-to-1, is the ratio is the unitary ratio, as he would call it. And from this harmony of 1-to-1, all other harmonies emerge. And if we add in Schwolde Lubitz there, he would say that all of those other harmonies emerge from the action of the golden section. The golden section is the cut that cuts that one and allows it to become many. And the action of the golden section essentially numbers the cosmos. It's a deep point and difficult, but it's one to think about. The Schwolde Lubitz, again, he's equating number, consciousness, the present moment, this idea of logos, all with the golden section, all with this, let's say for the Egyptians, the cosmos is constantly recreated now in this moment. And the infiniteness of the one is contracted and divided by that perfect cut of the golden section. And from that, all the other numbers, proportions, ratios, relationships, geometries emerge.
Fantastic. Okay. Do you see this ancient knowledge returning in modern culture, or are we still at the stage of rediscovery?
I think it's having a bit of a renaissance. I think John and Keith, John Neal, John Martineau with wooden books, they're all responsible for bringing this, these ideas through again in almost a bit of a renaissance. But whether that will impact the wider world, I don't know. I think it ultimately, for science to be, fully of integrity, it will come back to these ideas. It's got quite a long way to go. But I think they've always been present, and they always appear when they're most needed. Keith had a lovely phrase, which he said, "There's nothing as timely as the timeless." And so these timeless, eternal forms of number will always appear when they're needed most.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you, Adam. Great. I'm just going through the chat at the moment to see if we've got any more questions for you. Do bear with me for 1 second.
I think, Adam, that some of the principles that you've talked about are in some modern architecture, but it's just not as preponderant as it might have been. Like, I think if you look at different things like the pyramid of the Louvre, for example, that those principles are there, but it's very sporadic, and of course it's hidden. It's not like we all have to manage our lives and our societies and our buildings with these principles like maybe once people did. Yeah. So it hasn't gone away. It's just hidden.
No, I think you're right. I don't think it has gone away, but I do think that, say architects make using the golden section, designers using the golden section, very, very common. But whether they use it with the right intention, the intention for beauty, ultimately this is what the golden section is talking about. I don't know. I think that it's become a bit of a callous trick in design. Arrange everything according to the golden section and your product will sell more. In architecture, maybe it's more genuine, but still I think those modern architects tend to come from modern art schools, which tend to not want to hear anything about the divine or anything about the idea of the sacred, and so often they're coming with that modern mentality that might still use it, but I don't think really A, recognizes it, and B, cares to recognize it.
Yeah.
Okay. Brilliant. I've got a question here from Merlin's Boy. This is something slightly different. Would you argue for organized religion such as Christianity broke the connection with the earth?
I don't think any of the traditions broke the connection, but I do think that the tradition decaying into a political entity is what broke the connection. So, Christianity in itself is just as fine as any of the other traditions. But when that becomes just a political entity, then that's going to be used to oppress people, as many of the great religions have been. I was saying to someone the other day, it's such a shame that something so amazing could go so wrong. The idea that these are here to help us to awaken as beings that are connected to the cosmos, and yet we've got to argue over petty dogmas, and not just argue but become irrationally violent.
Okay.
And I think that early Christianity was quite animistic anyway, wasn't it?
Yeah, certainly the Celtic Christianity, they worshipped in the trees, they fully acknowledged the Druidic past. One of the early quotes from John Scotus or Erigenia, who was like the theologian that put together the sort of Celtic Christian ideas and the Greek Platonic ideas. Erigena, I've probably forgotten the quote now. Yeah, oh yeah, that was it. Erigena said that Christ was his druid, and so he's absolutely linking the druidic to the Christian at that, that's the 8th, 9th century. And so I do think it was very animistic, and I think there's just been choices along the way that have turned, like any of the traditions, this beautiful idea of transformation and awakening into doing what you're told, and whatever political grab is going on at the moment, or at that moment.
Okay, brilliant. This will probably be the last one from the audience for tonight. From Orgulug, what are Adam's thoughts on the origin of Stonehenge? Were the blue stones part of a large stone circle in West Wales, as suggested by MPP?
Well, I guess he means Mike Parker Pearson,
yeah,
who's actually working from Robin Heath's discoveries, but no one ever mentions Robin Heath because, but Robin's very convinced. I've visited Robin recently. He took us around some of those sites in Wales, and he's shown me the geometry, and it is very convincing. And I've not looked into it deep enough myself to say yes or no either way, but Robin has been very convincing on the subject, so maybe, yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, right. If someone new like myself wants to begin exploring harmonic geometry, where do you think they should start, Adam, and how should they train their perception?
Well, you could start with my book. That's a pretty good intro, but you could also start by, when you're next in front of a piece of classical architecture, something with columns, realizing that those columns are all specific fractions. The divisions on those columns are all specific fractions. Realizing that, when you look at the relationship between, say, your hand and your forearm, or your foot and your forearm, or the height of your body, or the different pieces of your body, they all relate with simple whole number proportions. My forearm is 1.5, my foot is 1, something like that. And so, yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, any final thoughts, Melissa, at all?
Well, just to comment on that, you were saying that the units of measure from the ancient world are very precise, and you mentioned the temple of Luxor and Schwarzerdubitz and the body and the proportions that he'd overlaid over the temple. But where do you stand in relation to when people say that a foot is actually the foot of a human or a man, or
it's utter nonsense.
It's utter nonsense.
Total nonsense. Those are simple mnemonics. They're mnemonics used by craftspeople so they can remember things. So you can remember, if that's 1.5 feet, your forearm, then whenever you're doing, lumber work, you don't have to get the tape measure. You can just, do it. Like if either of you remember buying cloth from those old-fashioned haberdasheries where people would measure the yard out like that. So they'd just start from the center of their chest, and they'd measure it, and they'd keep measuring it like that. And I always used to look at them and think, they're not using a tape measure. How do they know? And then, of course, now I realise that that's 3 feet. That's a yard.
Yeah.
Although they always had, quite small women doing it, so they would have made a little bit of profit there.
No wonder the practice was stopped.
Yeah. But so there's that. So harmony is everywhere. You put a rectangle around a leaf, you've probably got a harmonic proportion. You around a feather. It's wherever you look. Anywhere in the natural world, you will find harmony. Specific numerical harmony is easier to find in human-made things. Certainly anything made before the meter, which is 1750s. Anything made before 1750s, you will find those simple numerical harmonies.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, this has been absolutely fascinating. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you so much, Adam, for sharing your time and knowledge with me today. I've learned an awful lot. And thank you to Melissa for joining us.
It was a pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks. Good questions from both of you. It's been really good.
Great. Okay, lovely. Thank you. Okay, please like the video, everyone. And if you're new around here, do subscribe to the channel. I'll be back next week for episode 47 of the History CV of Britain. And my guest will be Ralph Ellis. And we'll be discussing the Shakespeare authorship question again. So fingers crossed this one comes off. Okay,
Great.
thank you, everyone.
Mention my, could you
Yes.
mention my Instagram as well, at Adam Tetlow Teaching.
All your,
Adam Tetlow.
oh, yeah. And
Yeah.
the links to your Adam's books are underneath the video.
Sweet.
Okay, brilliant.
Great. Thanks, Paul.
Lovely.
Thanks
Cheers.
for listening.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Great.
I was so nice chatting to you, Adam.
Yeah, we'll have to exchange emails and talk about this stuff, because
Absolutely.
not many people
And I'm
interested.
really sorry. I didn't mean to grill you on the meter.
Oh no, it's fine. It's fine. I'm happy. You know, my general approach is just like Socrates. If you can prove me wrong, we'll part as friends.
That's
And
nice.
so
Well,
that's,
exactly.
you know,
It was not about proving. I was just interested in your view. And then someone put in the comments, "Oh, she's got her German Paxman thing going on." I said, "Oh no, they're gonna think I'm being mean." I'm sorry.
No, I don't mind at all. And it's something that a lot of people don't notice with some of these meter stuff. And so, you know, a lot of this stuff is it's easy to fudge it if you remove the decimal places. And once you add them in, then you realize.
And to be fair, and I realized, like, it's contentious, and then there are variations on the meter. Plus, you got the problem of the difficulty of measuring the circumference. Like, I know there's lots of issues, but I am in favor of it, and I know that's something that John Neal used to kind of not approve of, but that's okay.
Yeah, well, John would correct that meter to a true meter, and that true meter would be 105 over 32 feet, which is like a.
Is that what he calls the Belgic yard?
Sorry?
Is that what he calls the Belgic yard? That's. I think
it's a version of the Belgic yard. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, because he has like 3 versions. I can't remember
there's multiple versions. You know, there's yeah.
I know. I get sometimes a bit confused with his his route geographic and everything. And
yeah, me too. Well, I did. I just hit my head with it for years on end, and suddenly it clicked. And, it took about 5 years for it to suddenly go, oh, that's what it's talking about. The number of times we had the conversation, and I